making things take a place. Because with reverb and volume, you can make them closer or
Front to
further.
back.
But with the filters, you can put them up or down.
Right.
To a certain extent, of course, because if you do it too much, then you lose the sound.
Right. You don't want to cut the fundamental of the bass altogether, right?
Yeah. So, but it's so crazy. Like, for example, if you filter with a filter that is 6 dBs per octave, which is not very steep or aggressive, you can actually get pretty high until it feels weird.
Right.
Because it's letting a lot of the lows still pass, right? Same with the high cut. The steeper you go, the more noticeable it is. And it's also changing the phase at the filter point or whatever. It's funny because then now you have like you have the filters and you have the reverb, and of course you have the panning and the volume, right? And you have the saturation, and you haven't even compressed or EQ'd or anything, and then you have a whole bunch of possibilities out there. Just boom, there you go.
Yeah, so many ways to work without even touching a compressor or even a EQ beyond just a filter, right? Like, yeah, and you can also when you high pass or low cut, you can kind of shape the cue so that you get a little bit more low end right before it starts ducking it out, right? You can get like
you can have that little bump before the
little bump, right? By like the 80 hertz bump on the bass or something, or the other way around. Also, like on a hi hat, you could like cut it at like 10K, but like it's bumping up a little bit over there, or something.
So yeah, I mean these are all ways of doing things. I mean, I do compress a lot. Don't think I'm just saturating and putting reverb. I compress a lot, like a lot. But I'm not compressing so much on the master bus as I used to. And when I'm saying as I used to, it could be from 4 dBs or more on the master bus.
Oh, wow.
And now I'm like, I'm way more, conservative in that part, because I feel like I've learned how to manage the separate elements by themselves better than before, so I'm not putting that much load on the master bus compressor. And then I'm just using the master bus compressor to make it glue together or make it tighter if the song needs it, or if the execution, like musicianship, was a little bit too loose,
all over the place
or whatever.
Yeah, I totally get that. In terms of like the rest of your mixing process, is it templated at all? Is it free form? What does it look like? Do you like import a session and you're kind of like, okay, I have like this kind of like vocal processing, I have this bass processing, or is it just like everything, however whatever has to happen, totally different?
I only have a whole bunch of reverb and delay presets. I don't even have a template per se, in the sense of me loading a template from a blank session or whatever. I just have the presets there. I open the plugin and just recall the preset. The only thing that it's basically set on stone is the master fader that has the metric AB plugin on it for referencing and ABing against my references and the artist's references. That's the only thing that it's like, that's not negotiable. The rest, everything changes.
Yes.
In some songs, I'll group the drums into a sub master. In some songs, I don't. I mean, it depends. I mean, every song is different, so I feel like why would you do the same on each song, unless you always want to sound the same?
Right.
I mean, that's also the thing that also comes from my past of being in Panama. Like, you cannot process the salsa the same as you process a rock or a jazz recording, or like, you have to completely approach it differently. And then one day you'll have an electro pop song, which will have nothing to do with whatever the other genres that I just mentioned have to do with, So like you like it's not, let's say, for example, somebody that does it a lot, it's, for example, CLA. He has a way of working, but he's usually doing kind of the same kind of music all the time. So it makes sense for him to do that.
Yes.
And I completely understand it, respect it, and admire it, right?
Right.
But for me, that I'm working with a ton of stuff, it doesn't make any sense. And I've thought about making a reggaeton template and a salsa template and this whatever, but I've tried it and it just doesn't work for me. It takes all the fun away.
Yeah, I love how thorough and inspired you are by the music and how you're willing to kind of even just from the beginning, right? With like, what's the color? And it's like that discovery process of what is this song and what does it really need? And then when you kind of figure out what it needs, you just use your toolkit to get there, and you don't worry about, how it's set up or whatever.
Yeah, because, I mean, sometimes you'll imagine a kind of reverb. You'll have to search for it. I mean, if
Oh, yeah. I've been down that road, yes.
You can
Many times.
Spend hours looking for a reverb and just drive yourself nuts and go down the rabbit hole with the reverbs, right?
Totally.
But the thing with when you do these kinds of things is that it's when you learn the most, because it's when you may discover other things that sound really good, which is not what you're looking for, but now you know how to get there, and you'll probably save a preset or not, depending on how important it was for you. But that's how you actually discover things, just going for it and trying to get to somewhere.
Right.
And I see so many people using presets, like just using the presets, and and I've had people asking me like, what preset do you use on whatever song? I'm like, I don't use presets, man. I do whatever I think the song needs me to do to get it to the point where I want it to go. And people are like, are you serious? Mm-hmm. You don't use presets? I'm like, no, I don't use presets. Like, presets didn't exist when I was working on a console.
You had to use your ears and figure out what it needed.
Now you said your ears. Use your ears. I feel like people are not listening anymore. People are looking.
Yes. Big problem.
People are looking at numbers, looking at meters, looking at not going into the red light and just, oh, how many lofts it is, and I need it to be loud, so I need to be at minus whatever. Dude, that's the lofts have a relationship between how loud it's going to be, yes, but there are ways to make it feel louder and still have the same number if you use your ear, because that's how it works,
Right.
And that's how like really great mastering engineers actually make things sound louder on Spotify, because Spotify just normalizes down to minus 14. And even though the meter will tell you minus 14, this song will sound louder than the other one. Like, how did they make that happen? Right? Because they're using their ears. Right? They're not necessarily looking at the meter. They have to look at the meter for a guide.
Right.
To know that they're not going over something or that they're not whatever. But if you look at meters all the time, like, you're not going to get anywhere. Also, one thing that we have in the digital world is latency. And like sometimes what you're hearing does not actually sync to what you're looking. And your eyes are very powerful. And they can make you think the audio is changing volume as that needle is moving, and it's not. It's just because of looking.
Right.
And then, it is important to have meters. It is important to have needles and guides and whatever, but do not look. Use your ears.
Yeah. I love that. It's so important. And it's like, I think I was just talking with somebody named Brent Hendrich, and he was talking about how his mixes got so much better when he stopped soloing and he stopped looking so much.
Yeah.
You know, when you listen to things in the context of the whole mix and you're not just looking at whatever the EQ that pops up on the Pro Q3, or, you know, you're not looking at the meters, like all of a sudden it's just like about the music again and about what your ears are hearing. And
yeah, and
man, like that's what we listened to when we were growing up. We were just listening to the music, right? We didn't look at
the thing right now is that we have so many tools which are good. They're excellent. That, for example, a Pro Q, you open it up because you want to take a resonance out, and then you get the graphic, the analyzer there, and then you see something like a peak going, and then you're gonna be drawn to go get your EQ point to that higher peak, which is probably not gonna be the one that you're listening to, right? So
yes.
I mean, I'm not telling people to
click to verify, right?
I'm not telling people to turn it off because it's useful, but don't take it as the go-to thing, right? Like, just leave it there and don't look at the line and listen to what you're doing, but don't look at the graphic because that's, you know, like, oh, how many dBs do you take off, or how many dBs do you add? I don't know. I take how many dBs off I need to take, and I add how many dBs I need to add. And how do you know where to add or where to take it off? I'm just like, because I want to get somewhere in my mind. In my mind, that thing has too much of this. How much is too much? I don't know. It's just too much. So I'll just go there and dial it down until it's right.
Yeah, and how many times? I mean, I've never mixed on a console, but you know, from what I understand, you just crank it until it sounds good. And with the EQs or whatever, sometimes you're hesitant to crank it as much as you might because that just looks like too many dBs. So let's just dial it back.
But there's another thing with using consoles is that, I mean, they're analog. They would saturate. So and that's another thing for using the saturation on the DAW is you can crank. And you're cranking before the saturation, so the saturation is actually stopping the EQ from being harsh.
Oh, yeah. Interesting.
It's kind of like EQing into compression.
Right.
But saturation also compresses in a different way, in a very different way. So, which is, for example, why CLA can crank the highs on his console and it still sounds great.
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
It's...
Yeah.
I mean, I've mentioned CLA twice because I know a lot of people know him, right? But that also happened on consoles. Here on a plugin, it doesn't matter if it's an analog emulation. If you crank it, you crank it. Period. Nothing's gonna hold it back unless you put a compressor after it, right? If you also use a little bit of saturation and the compression, and then another saturator over somewhere on the subgroup, and then another one on the master bus and whatever, you know, little by little, you'll hold it back and you'll be able to just crank the hell out of something and feel that that element comes present, but it doesn't come out of the mix.
Right.
But it has to be very, very subtle, because then if it's too much saturation, as soon as you crank those mids out, then it's going to distort the mids.
Right.
So, yeah, it's
wow.
It's kind of like a balancing act, but like that's something that you'll, you know, it's you can develop it with time. Like it's only that. It's time.
Yeah, of totally. Yeah, I love the full picture, like the full view, eagle-eyed view of the whole mix, and like there's like all the different layers and the stops that you can kind of pass along to kind of shape it or saturate it, or you know, give it a sound, and just knowing when to do that. And yeah, like you said, like just reps, like just doing it again and again and again until you kind of learn what all your plugins are doing, what kind of chain leads to what, you know. Yeah, I gotta think about that a little bit more. The whole like EQing into saturation, because I don't think I've ever really thought about it like that. Because I obviously I know about EQing into compression, right? And I know that what the EQ is doing, like how it's affecting it because of just hearing it. But like I've never really thought about like, oh,